Okay, I've got a couple of questions. We know that the Roman government persecuted the early church and executed the apostles. So eventually, after 300 A.D., the Catholic organization came to be. Was it their job then to persecute the Christians?
Yeah, they persecuted real Christians. They call them heretics. Because if you weren't Trinitarian, you were a heretic.
Okay, my next question is, long time ago, maybe 30 years, I remember being in a group and they talked about maybe a guy named Zwingli. Or anyway, the guy was bound his hands and feet and put in a boat and set out to sea to perish. Was that Zwingli or someone else?
Someone else about that same time, yeah.
Okay, does anybody have any real idea how many Christians were executed by the Roman organization?
Well, is there a possibility that the speaker is on in the main auditorium? Okay.
We just did a bunch of new sound stuff, so I think there's
Yeah.
stuff they're trying to figure out probably.
But I think if somebody went in and flipped.
We're on.
Okay. Well, all right. I'm glad I believed in sound doctrine, you know. Yeah, see, there were no real Christians in Western Europe at the time of Zwingli or any of those guys. Okay, they're coming out of Roman Catholicism. So you had three major movements. You had Roman Catholicism, you had the Protestant movement, which was a combination of Luther and Calvin. Zwingli was part of that. In Zurich, Switzerland, is actually a statue of Zwingli, and he's got a huge Bible here in one hand and a huge sword in the other. And it didn't bother those guys to burn at the stake anybody that they regarded as heretics from their belief system. And the third movement was the Anabaptist movement, which was essentially adult baptizers or rebaptizers. And of course, the modern Anabaptists are your Hutterites and the Mennonites and Amish. Okay, those are holdovers from the Anabaptist movement. And the Anabaptists were persecuted by both the Catholics and the Protestants. Okay, so it was an area where you just executed anybody that didn't have the same religious beliefs you had. Okay, and that was part of when the United States of America became free, that they set free from that. There was real religious freedom here in America, which is a tremendous blessing. And I think I may have quoted a statement from Alexander Campbell before, but he took a 2-week or took a trip to England, and then they jailed him in England for a couple weeks for his religious beliefs, and that's in the 1800s. And but he made the statement. He said that, but for the circumstances of living in this blessed republic, he said there is no doubt in his mind that he and his fellow promulgators would have long since been dead. That's the language they talked in those days. So that persecution is of anybody who has different religious beliefs is pretty common. And it's a great way of okay, if you don't have the reason, if you don't have the facts, if you don't have the stuff that's based on the Bible, the only way that you can really continue to promote your religion is through force of some kind and intimidation. That's what you see. And of course, you see the Hutterites today. They basically pinned in those colonies. They're free to leave if they want, but it's tremendous pressure to stay in there. And the result is they don't question. They don't question their religious beliefs. You go to their assemblies in the High German of 1600. Okay, and they speak Low German, or Low Dutch as they would call it, and the head guy in the church, he runs the colony. So they obviously can't take the honest examination of the faith, and that's a holdover from the 1600s. So any other comments on that? Thank you. Yep, good. Other questions today? See, Mel and then Nick.
Did the Rome rule over Egypt during time of Christ?
Yes.
It did rule over Egypt.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The see, back in about round figures 50 BC, Cleopatra was the last of the Ptolemy monarchs. The Ptolemies were the Greeks that had come in the days of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great captured Egypt, and then when he died under suspicious circumstances, eventually the Greek Empire split into 4 parts. And in Syria, which with quite a large area, Antioch being the capital of that, you had the first general that ruled Syria was a guy named Seleucus, and so that's where the port city got its name, because they went from Antioch down to Seleucia and sailed from there to Cyprus. Okay, a lot of the Seleucid rulers were called Antiochus. So Antiochus the first, second, third, Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, the other part of the empire, Egypt, went to a Roman general named Ptolemy, Ptolemy. And some of those guys were actually good scholars, but the last of the Ptolemy monarchs was Cleopatra. And Cleopatra actually engaged in an affair with Julius Caesar and bore a son by him in order to try to preserve some Egyptian independence from the Romans. But the Romans took it anyway. And so at the time of Christ, Rome was firmly in control of Egypt. And that was important to Rome because the amount of grain produced by Egypt was super important to the survival of Rome. So when the Vespasian in 66 AD took control of the Roman army in the east and started to step by step control the seaports that supply food to Jerusalem. Okay, he's one of the first things he does is he controls Egypt. Okay, now when Nero committed suicide because he lost the confidence of the Senate. Okay, Vespasian, because his army controls the food supply out of Egypt, is in a position to catapult himself into being emperor. See, so Egypt plays a huge role in the Roman Empire politics, and so they made sure that that's one of the first things they controlled when they moved into the east. So, further questions on that, Mel?
No.
Okay, that's good. Nick?
Bob's question made me think of a question. Yesterday we went to Christy's mother's funeral, and they actually had 2 services. It was a Presbyterian church in Manhattan, so they did the traditional Presbyterian service, and then when that got over, they had a second service for the Eastern Star. And I didn't know what that was, but the name alone, I got on my phone and went to Mr. Reverend Google and Googled it. And in about 5 minutes, it's pretty easy to establish that what it is today is not what it is when it was organized. It was a very satanic and outright satanic organization in its beginning and in its inception. It used the star Sirius, which is a pentagram, sign of the goat beast, and then has these 5 colors and all these different things. And so in about 5 minutes, I was, into what this was. I'm just curious if you would comment, because I haven't got this far yet, and maybe you don't want to, and that's okay. How did it get from how it began to what it is today within the churches?
Okay. Again, that's a great question. Kind of the name of the game's deception. The Eastern Star is the female adjunct to the Masons. Okay, and or Freemasons is sometimes called. The Masonic order developed, the Knights Templars were an organization that developed in, the so-called Promised Land. Remember the Crusades, the purpose of the Crusades, starting around figures 1000 AD. The purpose of Crusades was to deliver the Holy Land from the clutches of the infidel Muslims, okay? whose purpose then was to get the Holy Land back out of the hands of the infidel Catholics. Okay, it was so several hundred years of wars going on. But the Knights Templars, they actually held the Jerusalem area, Israel area, for several hundred years, and they came back from that area with a lot of wealth, and they were able to form their own bank in Western Europe. And that was a problem. They were Catholic, but it was a problem to the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church had its own bank. Fact is, the Catholic Church put out a really great video exposing the dangers of the Federal Reserve System, because the Federal Reserve System is a competition to the Catholic Bank. Okay, just so all's fair in love and war, right? And so the Knights Templars developed their own bank. In fact, the Knights Templars loaned a lot of money to Edward Longshanks. If you've seen Braveheart, William Longshanks, Edward I was the King of England. And they loaned a lot of money to him, which he never paid back, which is also a significant point in history. But because the bank, the Catholic Bank, was in opposition to the Knights Templars Bank, a guy by the name of Jacques DeMolay was, kind of somewhat persecuted, and that was the formation of the Freemasons, okay? And so the young male adjunct to the Masons was the DeMolays, and the young female adjunct to the Eastern Star is the Rainbow Girls. And, I was a DeMolay, and, fact is I was the state chaplain as an atheist, okay, so what could I say? But what did I know about that, Nothing. It seemed it's a good thing to do on Tuesday nights, get out of the house. Basketball practice was earlier on Tuesday nights, so afternoon, so I could go to DeMolay on Tuesday nights and play pool afterwards. Hey, what you don't even think about it. They have all the secret orders, and of course, in the Masonic organization itself, it gets a lot deeper. My great-grandfather, Thomas John Wilson, was a Grand Master, 33rd degree Mason in the Scottish Rite, and so there's a long way in there. And when they keep a lot of that secret, but there have been some of those guys that come out. When you get into the 33rd degree Mason level, there's a lot of satanic stuff, and always has been and still is. Okay. Now, generally, the Masons is a good old boys club, and when they had the stuff going on at Virginia City and Bannock in Montana Territory's early days, very early on, the bad guys, the road agents, are just starting to kill a lot of people and take people's earnings and stuff like that. Well, a Mason died, and so, the Masons have their own Freemason ceremony as a part of a person's funeral. And so all of a sudden, they realized that there was quite a few Masons there in the Virginia City area. So, the Masons being a secret society and the bond of brotherhood, it was through the Masons then that they organized the vigilantes, okay, because they had guys they could already trust. All right. Now, so Eastern Star, as you pointed out, is satanic as well. Now, most of your people at a lower level got no clue as to what it is. Okay, here's your secret signs. Here's your memorized statement that you make. Okay, all right, good. Am I in? Yeah. Okay, good. See, that's all it is. But by the time, like I say, you get to a 33rd degree Mason, you're a long ways in. And same thing is true on the Eastern Star side of things. They organize it. They have different names, but they essentially have the same structure. How's it get into churches? Because people don't know. They don't know. Bill?
When did paper money get involved in all of this? After the printing press to start with, and
Well, the Americans invented paper money. Inventive people, those Americans. It was the
okay, up until now, the American, you see, the Americans invented paper money. So back then, everything, all that was coins then.
But again, the banking interest, see again, remember the big banking houses like Rothschild and Lazard Frères, Solomon Brothers. I mean, there's reason that these guys have names like Goldman Sachs or Silverman. See, because the Roman Catholic Church would not allow the Catholics to charge each other interest. Well, the Jews, being non-Catholics, of course they're modern Jews, they can't trace their ancestry back, they could loan money to Catholics. And so that's what built those big banking houses. Rothschild means red shield. Okay.
I just want to make a note on the idea of persecution. That's always been a big area of contention, even in discussing what people think is the correct faith or the correct group or the incorrect one. Like, people will often talk about how Christians throughout history have, caused as much damage as they have good. And of course, we want to say, the true church never did go around doing the mass persecution and never did. We need to understand that. And then, of course, it comes back to say, well, you guys are always pointing out the Muslims. There's plenty of peaceful, Muslims out there too, which that is true. There's plenty of them out there, but there's also the others that even to this day, very strong in a persecution. And so we have to be careful in doing that, because you have to go back and look at the scriptures. There's no Christian scripture, and I know the Old Testament is still Christian scripture, but I'm talking about there's no directives towards the church to go out and do any of this stuff. But there are plenty of directives towards the Muslims to do that kind of stuff. So in reality, just kind of get our brains straight on this, because sometimes that shuts us up. That shuts people up when they say, well, the church has done plenty of persecution too, and they bring up history, and then they'll use that to keep people from bringing up the flaws and the errors and the dangers of Islam. I've seen it happen. I've seen people shut down a lot of times with that. But one thing that you need to understand when you get back to the scriptures of each group, we'll say, is that it is only the rebellious and unfaithful Christians who persecute, and it is only the unfaithful Muslims who don't. And so I think that's one thing to just point out as we're talking about who persecutes who, and labeling that as who we think is a good or bad group is actually used as propaganda even today as their attacks against Christianity, but it seems like Muslims get a pass.
Yeah. Sharia law essentially means you will submit. Yeah.
So, going back to the Northern Star, Eastern Star. Like a lot of our holidays have pagan roots. They're really not Christian at all, as far if you went back to where they began. So I understand that a lot of people get caught up in these organizations and don't really understand where they came from. So my question is this then. First of all, like yesterday, do they do the two services because that's when the people are gathered together for the funeral? So it's just convenient for both. So looking ahead or at this congregation, what have you done, or what has the leadership of Christ Church done when you have a Mason with the two services?
Yeah, that's a great question. The last funeral I did was for Don and Darcy Bowie. That would be Diane Rice, her name now is, and Debbie Bowie from Missoula area. Their parents, okay? So I'm doing the funeral, and then there's a Mason guy, because Don was a Mason, and so he gets up and takes about 7 or 8 minutes and does the Masonic part of the funeral, and then I close it up, okay? Because there's not a lot you can do about that, see, in the evergreen and and all that kind of stuff. See, it's again, if you know what it is pure paganism. Now I knew Don well enough to know that he's a good old boy, in the Denver area. It's a way to make friends, have positive interaction, maybe make a few business connections. That's Chamber of Commerce, Masons, Kiwanis Club, or you can pick any of those. They're good ways of making connections, and business is all about connections, right? So I know that Don didn't have any never in his brain did it ever compute, never even thought, to question whether the Masonic organization was. But that's, when you get deep enough into it, like I say, my great-grandfather was 33rd degree Scottish Rite, and my grandfather became a Mason. I think my dad did too, but he quit right away, if I remember the story correctly. And but they don't know. See, so you get women that are being part of the Eastern Star. They have now, as real Christians, see, we're the kind of people always investigate. Before you jump in on something, you check it out before you decide whether you're going to be a part of it or not. And those are things that you have to look at. I got stuff that thick on the Masonic organization and certain details, going back in their history and stuff like that. Well, I'm not sure if this is staying on here. Every once in a while, I do have somebody that we're having Bible study with, and they're a Mason. And I don't bring it up early, but sometime down the road, if it seems appropriate, I'll bring it up, because that's something you honestly have to encounter. And again, most guys that are Mason or most ladies that are Eastern Star, they've never really looked. And the deeper things they don't know. You have to go through the 33rd degree to really know what it's all about. And they don't tell you. They don't tell you. You have to go through that to get there. So the only way we know is because some of the 33rd degree Masons broke with it and said, okay, here's what's here. So if anybody needs deeper documentation on it, I got it. Like I say, it's about that thick, and it's plenty of it there. Rick?
Just two quick comments. Number one, it's a good organization where you can find people who have an unbridled ambition. And those are the type that will gravitate towards that 33rd degree, because people do have an unbridled ambition, whether they're a would-be actor or actress, they'll compromise their character to get from point A to point B all along the way, because they're like a horse that's cut loose. The difference is a horse doesn't know where it's going, but they do know where they want to go, but they're just as wild and uncontrolled as that horse. But Jesus' statement, let your yes be yes and your no, no. If a person believed that, that would immediately cause a red flag to go up when you have to have secret orders, secret handshakes, secret passwords, secret knowledge, etc.
And I do need to point out that George Washington was the Grand Master of his lodge, and in fact, every year the Masons put on the reenactment of the inauguration of President Washington. It's the first president of the United States. And they do because they're doing the real history on that. But that's again, the city of Washington, D.C., if you see how that's laid out, you'll see Masonic stuff behind the designs. Very early on, the Illuminati was in charge of the Masonic lodges of France and Germany. And the Illuminati, of course, is successful in bringing about the French Revolution of 1789. And when George Washington was asked in 1796, number one, if he knew about the Illuminati, and he said yes, he did. And number two, was he aware of the Illuminati's penetration into the lodges of Britain and America? And he said as far as he knew, they hadn't. The design of the Great Seal of the United States, which is on your dollar bill, the reverse side of that with the pyramid, the all-seeing eye, the Illuminati, and in the Latin words, Novus Ordo Seclorum, New World Order, would let you know that was designed and hung in the House of Representatives in 1792, if my memory is correct. And the obverse side was the only side that was visible. But so you have to understand that there's a lot of forces, that work through these secret organizations like the Masons. They used it to form the vigilantes, in Virginia City, you know, and the record is they had to do that. But again, you have to be aware that there's a lot of connections. There was a guy by the name of Alberto. Some of you remember, you know, Alberto was featured in one of J.T. Chick's kind of comic books. You know, and Alberto was a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest, and he became the president of one of the major colleges in Spain, one of the major Catholic colleges. And it came time for him to have an audience with the Black Pope. Now, the Black Pope's the head Jesuit. Okay, the Pope from the White Puff of Smoke, he's the figurehead. The Jesuits run the Catholic Church. Okay, they're the militant organization. So the head Jesuit is called by the Catholics the Black Pope. Okay, so Alberto got an audience with the Black Pope, and when he knelt down to kiss the ring, it was a Masonic ring. See, blew his mind. Okay. Eventually, Alberto broke with the Catholic Church, tried to get back to the New Testament, you know, full immersion for forgiveness of sins, you know, Lord's Supper for everybody every week. And on a speaking tour in Mexico, they killed him. So, but it was a shock to him to see that Masonic ring on the hand of the Black Pope. So there's a lot of stuff on the dark side that we don't know about. God does. I'm not sure that all this is working here, but God knows about it, and you know, so we need to be somewhat aware. But again, our focus has to be on, okay, this is the light of the gospel, and the light will expose the darkness. Bob?
When I was about 10, my dad joined the local Masonic lodge in Geraldine, and he was a social person, loved people, loved to talk, and I think that's why he did it. He had a lot of pressure from his close friends to do that, so he finally joined. And I was able to talk to him, and he admitted that when they joined, they take an oath to something to the effect that they rip the heart out of anybody that betrays the organization. And I asked him about that, and he said, yeah, but we don't take it seriously. So I said, well, that makes no sense. And eventually he drifted away from it, and he basically told me that the people there, you either had the local church or the Masonic lodge. They weren't involved in both of them. And so he let the lodge go away, and then when he died 20 years ago, the lodge members asked Mom if they could do I guess a service, you know, at the funeral, and she turned it down. So, but up there are no young people in it. I mean, it's the old people's thing.
Yep, pretty typical. So, Bill.
How did the Catholic Church come up with all the money that would have been required to build all these cathedrals and churches all over the world in very poor countries? Where did that money come from?
Collections.
What?
Collections. You go to a Catholic church, a lot of times they'll have the basket, right?
Yeah, okay.
And the basket is on a long pole, right? How many of you ever seen that? And so, you know, there's a lot of pressure for you to put in. And of course, see, then they got the indulgences, you know, you got to essentially pay for your sin. You know, you can pay to get people out of purgatory. You know, I mean, it's quite a shakedown operation, Mel. I mean, they got you locked in from cradle to grave, and it's got to be the priest, see? So, you know, I mean, hey, if your goal is to make money, and you lock them in from cradle to grave, good system, right? And, you know, you go to a place like Ghana, what's the fanciest building by far in any town? The Catholic Church building. You know, with people starving to death all around you, still got to have it. And, you know, what's probably the most expensive building in Montana? The cathedral in Helena, right? St. Helena's Cathedral, right? The big golden crosses up on top, and right? I've never been in there, but, you know, anybody been in there? Yeah. Pretty posh? Yeah. No. So it's a shakedown operation, Mel. That's where the money comes from.
I always had questions about George Washington. Like, how much did he know? I mean, he was very far in, but he didn't think the Illuminati was that far. I mean, he also, on the surface, was very Christian. I use that term, loosely, but what do you know about how far George Washington was into that satanic?
Well, he was 33rd degree Mason. And, George Washington's a complex man, if you study his history. Preaching at the family camp in Pennsylvania, I was giving them a little bit of their history. Because a lot of times we're sitting on history we don't even know about, okay? Well, the main road going for the travelers going into Ohio Territory was called Forbes Road. It's named after one of the early generals. Forbes Road runs right through Everett in Bedford, Pennsylvania. And that was the route travelers took to open the way to Ohio Territory, right? Okay, they didn't know that. Went right up to Raystown. Original name for Bedford was Raystown. And then Fort Bedford was built there. But what's really interesting is the French and Indian War was torched off in 1753. And what torched off the French and Indian War, which was a 7-year war between Britain and France on 3 continents, that war was torched off by George Washington. His soldiers killed a French nobleman outside of Fort Duquesne, which is now Pittsburgh. And Washington had tremendous interest in developing. He was a surveyor, and he had surveyed hundreds of thousands of acres in Ohio and Kentucky territory. And so he was pretty ambitious and aggressive. And one of his motivations in the American Revolution was to open up all that territory. So, those guys were patriots. When they said they pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor, they meant it. It's like Ben Franklin said, we have to hang together in this or we will hang separately. And there's, okay, if you got an opportunity for personal advancement, are you going to take it? Yeah. So Washington's a complex man, and a lot of things he didn't say. And so the part that the Masons played in his life, don't know. He obviously, is obviously a man of great character, and for his day, he was a man of great stature. And, over and over again, they would say that his presence at, the Constitutional Convention, just his presence sitting up there on the chair that the presiding officer had, that's where the word president came from, the presiding officer. His presence was very calming. And, what he went through during the Revolutionary War, his ability to hold solid, in many senses single-handedly, resulted in the victory of the Continental troops over the British Army. So, but there's a lot of complexities there. And how many other Masons were involved, we don't know. And how they're very definitely involved in the formation of the Republic, and to what extent, their tentacles continue to combine with the Illuminati. See, another guy, Alexander Hamilton, who, was the main push behind the Federalist Papers, the first Secretary of Treasury. First thing he did was he got a national bank. Even while the revolution was going on, he had a national bank. Okay, actually, it was a Rothschild bank. And after the United States, got their independence, Hamilton, as Secretary of Treasury, pushed through all kinds of things. Again, it was a tough spot because, what the people on the Eastern Seaboard weren't aware of was the fight for Ohio. Okay. Now, because George Rogers Clark during the Revolutionary War went to Vincennes, Indiana, and captured the fort there, then at the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, U.S. territory extended all the way to the Mississippi. And so now, see, all that territory is opened up. The British had said in 1763, no colonist was allowed east of the Appalachian Divide. Okay, and they said, because we can't defend it. We can't defend it. Well, Daniel Boone and these guys, they're not going to be stopped. See, so when the United States became free, okay, these guys started going over the Appalachian Divide. And there's a very powerful economic principle. It goes like this: water runs downhill. So it's a lot easier once you're west of that Appalachian Divide to ship your goods down the tributaries to the Mississippi than it is to try to haul them over the top of the Appalachian Divide and get them down, say the Potomac or something like that. See, so once those guys crossed, there's a lot of pressure. Well, the Shawnees, the Mingos, the Delawares, they're not very excited about the colonists coming into the property. So now, the new United States of America's got a war on their hand. Okay, Washington says we don't have a standing army. Almost all the founding fathers were opposed to a standing army, which you can understand why that is. But they said, look, we got a war going on over here in the Northwest Territories, and we don't have an army. And you guys, the states, you won't put up the militia for it. So Hamilton went to work as the Secretary of Treasury, set up a U.S. bank, the first U.S. bank, as a means of financing the war against the natives, okay? And the first battle was just a total defeat. A general by the name of St. Clair got totally wiped out near where Tom Tuck is from. If you guys ever been to Lima, Ohio, just west of Lima, Ohio, is where that St. Clair massacre took place. It was the worst massacre in American history. But how many of you know that, right? And so then Washington recruited General Mad Anthony Wayne, okay? And Mad Anthony got that name because he's a strict disciplinarian and said, we're going to do it this way, okay? So he had a very definite plan for step by step. And finally, at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, I asked Kirsten, I said, you know where Fallen Timbers is? Yeah, Judy does. Okay, you know why Defiance, Ohio gets its name? Okay, the battle that defeated the Indians was at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which opened up the settlement. But see, Hamilton was involved in a lot of underneath things in order to finance that war. Because if you're going to have a war, you're going to cost you money. Okay? And so, Hamilton was already subverting the Constitution as the Secretary of Treasury. I don't know, maybe it's the hand of God that he, lost fatally in a duel with Aaron Burr. Because who knows what the history of America would have been had not that happened. So a lot of complexities there. It's, I'm reading a book right now called The Miracle at Philadelphia by Catherine Dinker Bowen, on the Constitutional Convention. You just happen to have, at that point in history and at that time, the guys who could put aside self-interest in order to set up a constitution. And what happened after that was quite a bit of scattering, see. So, the Bible's pretty clear in Acts 17 that God determines at appointed times and boundaries the habitations of each nation. And we can really see the hand of God in the formation of America, and as we mentioned earlier, the freedom that we had to meet, to assemble, to preach, without fear of being put to death because we're a heretic from the, supposed authorities. That's huge, we got brethren today in Spokane, they can't meet in Washington State. So they actually have to rent in Post Falls. They're close enough to the Idaho line. They can go over to Idaho and rent facilities there in order to have the assembly. As mentioned in our men's prayer deal on the first, the guys in Spokane, they couldn't have had, what were there, 10 or 12 of us there? They couldn't have had that meeting legally. See, this is America. Where you can't meet for a prayer session in somebody's home. See, these are things we do have to think about going forward here, and try to understand a little bit of the history. God really has backed what's happened in America, and He will back the church. But the amount of faith that we're going to have to keep going forward, and Elliot did a great job in the opening. Fear cannot be the factor that governs us. I was thinking yesterday that any nation has to first be shackled by fear before the chains of tyranny can be attached. And so what you see right now is a tremendous move to shackle the people by fear, so that fear governs them rather than the faith to move forward. And so again, a lot of factors feeding into that. So the modern Mason, average, he doesn't know. Average Eastern Star, she doesn't know. DeMolay guy, Rainbow Girl, they don't know. Could care less for the most part. Okay, but at a higher, deeper level, yeah. So some pretty intense stuff there. So it's a great question, Nick. You got anything else you want to add to that?
I so appreciate just your knowledge of history. Just the way that you've laid out what you did this morning for me really gives me hope for the future too, because God is going to use our circumstances today to His will. And nothing is new under the sun. Yep. This evil forces that were in place when the country was established, they may be stronger now, but that they don't control the world. And I appreciate your knowledge of history.
Well, and it points out maybe many of us have to be willing to be martyred. If we go to Acts chapter 8, okay, here's the first century church, the entire plan of God, his purpose through the ages, okay, and these people are immersed into Christ and excited about the good news, the fact that the Messiah has come and He's been resurrected from the dead, and you can have salvation through faith and obedience to His name. And Acts chapter 8, verse 1, Saul was in hearty agreement with putting Stephen to death. And on that day, a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Some devout men buried Stephen, made loud lamentation over him. But Saul began ravaging the church, entering house after house and dragging off men and women. He had put them in prison. See, and then, of course, Acts chapter 9 says, now Saul, still breathing threats and murder. I like the old King James. It said threats and slaughter, okay, against the disciples of the Lord, okay. So that's the early church. When the scripture says all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, it's not kidding about that. So we have to be mentally prepared. You guys have heard me preach for the last 40, 50 years. I've always said, look, my job is to prepare you for the jail cell, the concentration camp, or the torture chamber, and to come through that successfully. See, we're not going to get there by playing churchy games. See, and so what's happening out there, the devil has really attacked the ability of the churches to teach sound doctrine. I work with preachers all the time. They're not going to teach anything controversial because that scares people away. Okay, I even know preachers, Christian church / Church of Christ preachers, that will not preach the literal 6 days of creation and the seventh day of God's rest, because of the fact that that's going to turn people who are more evolutionary away. Instead of dealing with the issue, they're not going to engage in controversy. Well, how are you going to develop the conviction in an individual saint to go through the jail cell, the torture chamber, concentration camp successfully by feeding them spiritual cotton candy all the time? So you can't do it. See, and so that's our warfare here, and that's the course that I started in 1972, and I haven't varied from it. I'm not going to vary from it as long as I have breath, And You know, I've taken a lot of flack over the years for it from a lot of, you know, nationally, internationally, you know, for, among other things, exposing the forces of darkness. You know, I used to go back east and, you know, I'd try to talk about these things a little bit. Say, yeah, Wilson, you're great doctrinally, you know, but hey, Montana, home of the Freeman and Unabomber and stuff like that, see? And so I used to kind of poo-poo but they don't do that anymore. See, because they reckon, oh, okay, what Wilson said 40 years ago, almost 50 years ago, was going to happen is happening. Okay? And so I've just tried to do my job. The Apostle Paul said he didn't shrink from declaring anything that was profitable. I've tried to follow that model because it ends up being really important, and really important in our ability to stand firm, be able to process where we are, in the wisdom of God, continue to make our way forward. Because that's what we have to do. See, the key thing is the forward. You know, you have to make an honest analysis of where you're at. You know, so that means you got to have factual information. You know, and the fact that it might snow today meant that I brought the car with Blizzaks. Okay? Okay? You know, it might, you know, I mean, by the time I get through the 450-mile run today, Wolf Creek Canyon twice, the North Helena Hill twice, Elk Park Pass, Homestake, and Cardwell Hill. You know, I got to factor that in before I take off in the morning. Okay? And God says, you don't factor it in, and you get caught, that's on you, buddy. You know? And that's just a small illustration of moving forward here in our country, in our situation. And thing. You know, the guys in like I say, Mark Miller leading the congregation there in Spokane, they said, okay, you know, if we try to meet in homes, you know, the people of the state of Washington are programmed to rat on their neighbors, right? See, that's communism. That's exactly what they do, you know, Nazism and communism. They can't enforce it. So what they do is they train people to rat their neighbors out. Okay? So the way they move forward is say, okay, we're going to rent from the Sleep Inn in Post Falls, Idaho. And Mark said it was really kind of a weird thing for him because you walk, he said, reminded him of the years we met at the Comfort Inn in Butte. Because you walk in, you don't go through the main motel entrance, you go through the side entrance. You walk in, you turn to the right, the doorway is to the left, the windows are over on the left side. He said, oh, he thought, thinking back to the years that he used to travel to Butte. He and Charlie, you know, would go to Butte with Missoula and Butte with me, and we had the assembly there. So that was how they make their way forward. Okay, a real problem, right? It didn't get to be theoretical for them. So they had to figure out how do we handle it. Okay, when Gianforte becomes governor, he's going to remove the mask mandate, right? Mandatory mask mandate, yeah. But good old Kelly, you know, the health officer for Gallatin County, he says he's going to enforce it, you know, for Gallatin County, okay? See, you give these, once you give government authority power, it's really hard to remove their iron claws from that point forward, okay? So, again, I don't know what we deal with going forward. I think they pretty well left us alone as a congregation. I don't know what happens, you know, after, you know, January 20th. I mean, I don't even know what happens after January 6th, to be honest with you. But so we have to take an honest assessment of these forces at work, pray for wisdom, and figure out how to keep moving forward. And nothing can stop us. I mean, you know, the Word of God is not imprisoned. See, Phil?
Just a note, I've had some pretty intense conversations with some of my friends that some of them preach in churches of Christ and Christian churches, some of them in denominational groups, just associates I've had through the years. If you have the conversation that you're not preparing your people for the persecution, that doesn't compute. Because generally speaking, even on small individual levels, they're teaching people not to be controversial anyway. So they're actually teaching their people to be in a position where they won't be persecuted. And that's what churches do. because most of the churches that teach the fluff, that teach the, you can't stand up for anything, the government's going to leave those alone for the most part. And so I get that even in their conversation. They don't always say that directly, but they're preparing their people to not be persecuted. And so I just want I just want maybe people to understand that. I don't think that, I think some of these leaders, would you say preachers, have in mind that the persecution is coming, but rather preparing their people to be able to make it through it, they're preparing their people to avoid it.
That's a great comment. Notice that, in the debate I had with Chuck Dowdy, he said several times that Wilson has the worst martyr complex I've ever seen. It's because, because they had to go through and listen to all the tapes to see if they could find some dirt on me, okay? So I'm sure that was an education in itself to have to do that. But see, one of the things I would bring up, that this is going to happen, unless history changes its course. This is where it's going. And so I have a martyr complex, trying to prepare congregation for being able to go through suffer persecution and to go. But see that, as you sell, that's not going to sell well. Okay, here we really want you to assemble with us in Christ Church, because we guarantee you that if you follow Christ, you will suffer persecution. Come on in. Okay? That's the truth, isn't it? Okay? But it doesn't sell well. So if you're engaged in selling the gospel instead of making disciples, you see, then you have to avoid stuff like that. So, great comment.